Hey, what's up there, YouTubers? Adjutant Synergy coming to you guys here today with another deck tech. So today we're going to be taking a look at a standard deck, and it is Gruul Aggro. Now, Gruul is a guild of Ravnica, and it is a guild that's aligned with green and red, so that's the color scheme that we're going to have for this deck. The deck functions a whole lot like red deck wins in both kind of the shell of what cards we're actually using in the deck, and also kind of the aggressiveness and how we want to approach aggro with this deck. So we're going to break it down here today, take a look at what all we have in this deck. But before we get to that, if you guys have any suggestions for decks that you would like to see, please leave them down in the comments below and I'll take them into consideration for future deck techs. Now, the first thing that we're taking a look at, as always, is going to be the land base of the deck. So we're starting off with our 20 card land base here. So we're not really running a whole lot of lands just because our curve, that is our converted mana cost curve, is only going up to 4, being Hellrider. So we don't really need that many lands in here. And 20 is pretty appropriate. So we have our Stomping Grounds here in playset form. We have Rootbound Crag in playset form as well. And then we just have our basics. So we're actually just running 12 basic mountains. So there's 4. There's 8 and 12. So 20 lands total, not very much to think about. Now we're going to get into the rest of the stuff that we have in the deck, starting off with our creatures in ascending order in terms of mana cost. So we have our Stromkirk Noble. He is a 1/1 for 1 red, and he can't be blocked by humans, and whenever he deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on him. So Stromkirk Noble ends up being pretty big pretty quick if you're playing him on turn 1, especially if you're playing up against some human variants. He ends up being really awesome. He's an all-star in the deck just because you can play him really early on, as early as turn 1. Later on, he's kind of lackluster just because you're essentially just playing a 1/1 for 1 red whenever it comes to like the mid game. But Stromkirk Noble is really well fitting in this deck to have for a early drop. From there we have Ash Zealot, so she's a 2/2 for double red for strike and haste. Whenever a player casts a spell from a graveyard, she's going to deal 3 damage to that player. So if our opponent's playing with flashback spells and stuff like that, the Ash Zealot is definitely going to help us out here to be able to just kind of win and not really have to worry about too many things. If we're already burning out our opponent and we get them to the point where they have the potential to reanimate something game 1, but they can't because of Ash Zealot, like that's the perfect thing about her, is just the fact that once you get to that realm where your opponent's not really going to have the ability to reanimate, you just have the almost instant win right there. So I like Ash Zealot for that. It also helps against the Flash variants because they run Think Twice, and some of the control matchups also run Think Twice, so Zealot definitely helps out with that. From there we have Flinthoof Boar. So essentially Flinthoof Boar is going to be a 3/3 for 2 for us. In how much I've played this deck, I don't think I've ever had a situation where I've gotten double Rootbound Crag in my opening hand and had to play the Flinthoof Boar as a 2/2. 99% of the time Flinthoof Boar is going to be a 3/3, and that's the best thing about him. He's a 3/3 for 2 mana, and for 1 red we can give him haste until the end of the turn, so it's not bad overall, and we're running a playset of him. So we just have a haste guy, well, a potential haste guy, but for the mana that we're putting into him, he's pretty solid. If we want to play it like turn 3, we pay 3 mana and have a Flinthoof Boar that's a 3/3 and swings for 3. From there we have Burning-Tree Emissary, 2/2 for double Gruul hybrid, and whenever it enters the battlefield we add red and green to our mana pool. So we're running a playset of Burning-Tree Emissary, and this is both to help us fix our mana if we need to cast green spells and we don't have the green mana for it, which it happens here and there. It's not very often, but you do get into the situation where you don't get green mana. But Burning-Tree Emissary helps us out because whenever it enters the battlefield, we get that 1 green, and we can either cast like Flinthoof Boar or Rancor or something like that, where it just kind of helps us out. But more times than not, it'll be like Burning-Tree Emissary into like another card like Ash Zealot or Flinthoof Boar. Ash Zealot, provided that we have like another source of red open, because the Emissary does add red and green, and Ash Zealot's double red. But Burning-Tree Emissary is pretty nice in the deck, just because you kind of get like 2-for-1 advantage here, because you're playing 2 creatures in 1 turn for like 1 set of mana that you're actually going to be spending. And then we have Boros Reckoner, so he's a 3/3 for triple Boros hybrid. And essentially we're just going to be playing the triple red for him. And whenever he's dealt damage, he's going to deal with that much damage to target creature or player. So if he's in a matchup with a bigger creature than him, like a Thragtusk or something even more huge, and that Thragtusk or whatever creature deals that damage to him, he's going to be able to redirect it just straight back at your opponent or at another creature that they have, which is really, really solid. He can also gain first strike until the end of the turn, so that also is a pretty nice thing to have with him. And we're running a playset of him, as you guys could imagine. He's just way, way too good to not run in the red deck variants. And I do count this as a red deck variant because it does have a lot of the shell things that we run for red deck wins, but we're just kind of adding the green to mix things up, add some different things that we want to have going on for us, like Rancor and the Flinthoof Boar. But moving on, we have Hellrider. So Hellrider is, again, another bomb in this deck. Boros Reckoner and Hellrider are the 2 best cards in this deck. He's a 3/3 for 4 with haste, and whenever a creature you control attacks, Hellrider is going to deal 1 damage to the defending player. And we're running a playset of him. So Hellrider is awesome just because you can redirect that damage to planeswalkers. So if it's like a case where your opponent plays like Liliana of the Veil and forces you to sack a creature, and then next turn you drop like Hellrider, having no other creatures, Hellrider can deal that 1 damage to their Liliana, get rid of it if it's at 1 loyalty, of course, and then Hellrider can just attack your opponent directly. So there's implications where Hellrider ends up being really nice and being able to distribute each one of the triggers in a fashion where you're going to get advantage from getting rid of planeswalkers, but more times than not, you're just going to be bashing your opponent in for a whole lot. And whenever you do swing alpha with a whole bunch of other creatures, the triggers do end up stacking very well in your favor. So I love Hellrider. He's just such a powerhouse in the meta right now. So moving away from the creatures and going into all the other spells that we have, I'm actually running Mugging in here. And a lot of players have been using Pillar of Flame, but Mugging is somewhat better, actually. With Mugging, I'm running a playset of it, so it deals 2 damage to target creature, and that creature can't block this turn. Now, with Pillar of Flame, the biggest thing with Pillar of Flame was that Pillar of Flame was implemented to be able to deal with the zombie-based decks. Now, zombies aren't really as huge, and even if we do get into that zombie matchup, Mugging is still perfectly fine because their Grave Crawlers can't block as it is. Mugging is still going to deal with other small creatures like Dire Grafdigger if we go up against that. Giralf's Messenger enters tapped for them, and if we have to get rid of a untapped Giralf's Messenger, if like they didn't swing with it the following turn, we can still drop Mugging on Giralf's Messenger, his Undying triggers, and he's going to come back, but he's going to come back tapped, so it's not like it really matters a whole lot. Mugging up against any creatures that are like 3 toughness, 4 toughness, anything like that, it's going to force them to not be able to block, so Mugging just really gets there in allowing you to swing, especially if your opponent only has like 1 creature backed up and they're like banking like, all right, well, I'll swing with everything except this 1 creature that's going to stay back and block for me, and then you just drop Mugging and you end up having a perfect advantage over your opponent. So next we have Rancor. So Rancor is 1 green and enchants a creature, and it gives it +2/+0 in trample. And if Rancor is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, return it to its owner's hand. So the thing I like about it is just the fact that each time that the Rancor is put into the graveyard, we're just going to get it back. It's a really awesome way to just kind of recycle it. Like, we put it on a creature, if the creature happens to die, we get it back to our hand, that we can recast it on another creature. But trample is really, really strong. Even the +2/+0, the +2/+0 is really nice to have on a creature, but the fact that it gives trample as well, so if your opponent's chumping with like 1/1s or something, the Rancor definitely gets there. So I love it as a playset, and it's reusable if your creature happens to die. From there, we have our Searing Spears in the deck. So I'm running a playset of Searing Spear, and it's pretty basic as far as the red deck variants go. So playset of it deals 3 damage to target creature or player, and it's pretty versatile. You can either use it to burn out your opponent or get rid of creatures that have 3 toughness or less. And then we have a playset of Brimstone Volley. So Brimstone Volley is one of my other favorite cards in this deck because it can deal 3 damage to target creature or player for 3, but if a creature died during the turn with Morbid being relevant, it's going to deal 5 damage to target creature or player instead. So Brimstone Volley ends up being really awesome because when we get to that mid game where we've already dealt a pretty sizable amount of damage to our opponent, but then they start dropping stuff like Huntmaster of the Fells or Centaur Healers, stuff like that, things that can block our stuff pretty effectively. When they start dropping those kinds of cards, we can still swing alpha, and if our opponent decides to like trade, like, oh, all right, I'll block my 3/3 with your 2/2, I'll still take the rest of it, and then you're like, all right, well, Brimstone Volley deal 5 to you. That 5 damage is a huge chunk. Being able to take away a fourth of your opponent's starting life total, that is assuming that their life total didn't change with like Thragtusk or anything like that. A fourth of the life total is really huge, and it's oftentimes the card that ends up winning the games for me. So playset of Brimstone Volley just to bash their face in. Now that's the main board that we have for this deck. Now let's jump over and take a look at the sideboard. Alright, so for our sideboard here, we have, first off, Mizzium Mortars. Now, Mizzium Mortars is a 2 of here, and it deals 4 damage to target creature we don't control, and it has an overload for 6. The overload isn't very relevant, but if we do get to that point where we have to play defensively, where we're getting into the mid game and unfortunately the late game, Mizzium Mortars does end up helping us out a little bit. But Mizzium Mortars is the biggest thing that we can have up against stuff like Lexodon Smiters, other 3 toughness creatures like Centaur Healers. Ultimately, it just hits a lot of other things that aggro-based decks are going to have, like the Zoo variants, other human decks. There's just a ton of different aggro variants that are in the meta right now. So Mizzium Mortars helps us out by having a more it's kind of like a more broad form of removal because it's going to let us hit more things than Searing Spear, for instance, would let us hit into. But the only downside is it's at sorcery speed, which isn't all that bad. Next, we have Nightbird's Clutches, so I'm only running this as a 1-of. So up to 2 target creatures can't block this turn for 2 mana at a sorcery speed. So again, it's kind of like mugging, where if our opponent's running the things where they can actually get them onto the battlefield and just block our stuff outright, Nightbird's Clutches ends up being pretty good in that we're able to swing alpha and just not be answered and deal that damage pretty effectively. So I like having the Clutches just as a 2-of, and it also has a flashback for 4, which is pretty convenient as well. So if we need to flash it back yet again the following turn, if we're on like turn 3, turn 4, oftentimes it's like turn 5, turn 6 when I want to swing alpha and win the game that I drop Nightbird's Clutches. And at that point, you have a pretty good ability to just be able to flash it back effectively next turn. So it allows you to have that one awesome swing in one turn and then also be able to swing again the following turn. We're also running Blasphemous Act in the sideboard, so I'm running 2 of them. It's a sorcery speed card, and it's 9 to cast. It's 8 generic and 1 red, but it actually costs 1 less to cast for each creature on the battlefield, and it deals 13 damage to each creature. Now, up against matchups where they don't have Boros Reckoner, this card is nuts because we have our Boros Reckoner as it is. If we have one out there and we drop Blasphemous Act, dealing 13 damage to our own Boros Reckoner and being able to redirect it, chances are we're pretty much just winning the game just right out from there. If we have 2 Boros Reckoners, we won the game. The only kind of tricky situation is if they're also running Boros Reckoner, and in that given case, it's just a matter of who has the lower life totals and can you spare taking Blasphemous Act, dropping it on the field, and being able to resolve it to where you're just going to win outright from that point on. So, like, if it's, I have one Boros Reckoner, my opponent has one Boros Reckoner, but my opponent's, like, at, I don't know, like 7 life or something like that, we drop Blasphemous Act and we give no regards to their Boros Reckoner being able to deal 13 damage to us. So the Blasphemous Act ends up being really strong in the sideboard, and we have it as a 2-of. So we see it fairly consistently if we want to side it in. I'm also running Grafdigger's Cage in the sideboard, and disregard that this is a Tormod script. It's actually supposed to be 2 Grafdigger's Cages, and that's exactly what's going to be listed down in the description below where the entire deck list is. So it's 2 cages. Cage is really strong up against Reanimator. Red doesn't have really a defined removal, or, well, removal as well, but hate for graveyards. So there's not really a whole lot of ways. There's Rakdos Trump, but that would require us to have black, which we don't have. In green, we do have Ground Seal, but opponents are going to have ways of being able to get rid of enchantments. They're not, however, going to have ways to get rid of artifacts, so Grafdigger's Cage ends up being pretty nice for us. Creatures can't enter the battlefield from graveyards or libraries, and players can't cast cards in graveyards or libraries. So Grafdigger's Cage ends up just being the easiest way to stop Reanimator from going off, and the biggest one is probably the Human Reanimator, where they go into Angel of Glory's Rise, reanimate all of their things, and they're essentially able to loop it to where they can get infinite life, infinite creatures, infinite 2/2s off of Huntmaster, that is. But the Grafdigger's Cage keeps that in check, and it provides a card that they cannot deal with. So 2 of those. I'm also running Skullcrack as a playset. So Skullcrack says that players can't gain life this turn, damage can't be prevented, and it deals 3 damage to target player for a instant speed 2-cost card, 1 generic and 1 red. So Skullcrack is our way to keep Thragtusk in check, as well as Sphinx's Revelation. Now with Sphinx's Revelation, they're still able to draw cards, which is kind of a bummer, but at the same time, if they're cracking Sphinx's Revelation for like 5 or 6 or something like that, Skullcrack definitely gets there. We're able to not allow them to get that advantage over us and make us deal that damage yet again. And Skullcrack itself deals 3 damage to the target player as well. So on its own, it's not like it's just, oh, prevent all life gain that would be done. It's prevent all life gain, damage can't be prevented, and you also are going to be dealing 3 as it is. So Skullcrack is really nice to have against the Thragtusks and the Sphinx's Revelations. And then the last card that we have as a playset is going to be Volcanic Strength for us. So the enchanted creature is going to get +2/+2 in Mountain Walk. So Mountain Walk is extremely relevant up against other variants where they're going to be running a lot of mountains, a lot of shocklands that are mountains, like the Stomping Ground, Blood Crypts. So Volcanic Strength ends up getting there pretty well for us, in that up against the Zoo variants, whenever we drop Volcanic Strength on something like the Flinthoof Boar, they don't really have a way to deal with it, as well as Boros Reckoner, because in the Zoo variants, they are going to have removal up to 4 damage, so they're going to have to drop like 2 removal spells. The biggest thing that they have is Mizzium Mortars, as well as possibly Bonfire of the Damned, but I haven't seen way too many of the decks running it lately. Mizzium Mortars is a problem, but if you're able to drop Volcanic Strength on something that has 3 toughness, or even greater if you have like double Volcanic Strength or something like that, if you drop Volcanic Strength on something with 3 toughness, you essentially have yourself a power position where you're dealing 5 damage unanswered every single turn, and generally you're going to win the game just off of that. But the biggest thing to remember with Volcanic Strength is you don't want to give your opponent 2-for-1 advantage and play Volcanic Strength when your opponent has all of their mana open and they're able to just drop like Searing Spear on one of your 3 toughness creatures and just get rid of it outright. So Volcanic Strength is a card that is really good to side in, but you have to know how to operate with it and how to actually be able to cast it onto a creature at the right time, be able to call your opponent's bluffs when they actually are bluffing removal, and be able to just kind of get a better advantage over being able to play Volcanic Strength correctly and you just win the game outright from there. So that is the main board and the sideboard for Gruul Aggro here. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you did, remember to like, favorite, and subscribe for more Magic the Gathering content. Until next time, guys, have yourselves a wonderful, fun-filled Magic the Gathering day.